Hello, people. Today we are continuing our series about the reflections of God in the world around us that we've been talking about through January. And I'm specifically looking at some of those reflections that we see in nature. So I like spending time in and around nature. A lot of people do, whether it's in the garden or going for a walk close by or going out camping or on a bushwalk or out to the beach. Something about just being out in nature, feeling the sunlight and the breeze and the smell of fresh air just feels right. This sort of connection to nature is common for many people around the world. Often more obviously among Indigenous people groups, farmers, park rangers and others who work in and on the land. Some people living primarily in cities and especially in high density housing do have a bit of a disconnect, but many still do go seeking time in nature when they can, or bring it into their lives by filling their apartment with 50 million houseplants and, 5 cats. This is so important to people that there are a range of spiritual, pseudo-spiritual and pseudo-scientific practices around connecting with nature. If you haven't heard that pseudo word before, that just means false. So it's, fake looks like. So it's something that looks like a spiritual practice but isn't really spiritual, or something that kind of looks scientific but isn't actually, is what's meant there. So that ranges from traditional religious practices, modernised spiritualities, right through to modern concepts like earthing. If you haven't encountered earthing, it's a concept where you have to spend time outside barefoot so that you can ground your electrical charge with the electrical charges of the earth and with the earth's electromagnetic fields. Now, some of these practices we look at and think that's ridiculous, how could anyone think that works? The thing here is that people try them and then they feel better. That's why they think it works. Because they tried it, and it did work, or sort of worked. They felt results. There's even science behind some of it. When you spend time out in the forest and you feel your mood lift, that is actually to do with the off gases of the bacteria breaking down leaves under the trees, is that there is actually something in that that genuinely affects your serotonin levels and, makes you happier. When you spend your time outside, walking barefoot on things, you engage muscles in your feet that you don't normally use. If you just walk around, on man-made flat surfaces in good supportive shoes that restrict the way your feet move, those muscles don't get used. And because of the way the human body works, sometimes when you have issues or injuries, you don't actually feel that where the problem occurs. So while it's muscles in your feet that you're not using, where the consequences can be is your knee or your hip or your back. And so someone who goes out and tries earthing suddenly finds that their back pain they've had for years has gone away. And it's not because earthing works, it's because they've re-engaged muscles in their feet, which helps them to move better and function better, which then evens out tensions elsewhere. But that means that people try something, and because it helps with a problem they don't see a clear connection to, they are open to accepting the explanations provided, because they don't have other explanations that make sense, but they do have direct experience that something worked. But why do people have this drive to connect to nature? And why does it actually help them? Well, people were created to be in nature, to be stewards of God's creation. You can read the creation story in Genesis 1 and 2 along with the fall. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about that here, nor is it relevant to get into whether it's a literal 7-day creation or gradual creation through evolution or any of the other theories people have there. The relevant part is that God's plan for humans was to be in and around the natural world, both using it and taking care of it. So when a person who practices earthing goes out and feels results, that's not because they needed to tap into the Earth's electromagnetic currents. But it's also not just in their head. That's them re-engaging with the world they were made to be part of, after living in a society that tends to distance us from it and put protective measures in to save you from it. You know, you have good rubber-soled shoes so that you don't, step up in rocks and, hurt your feet. They may not recognise it themselves, and some past church attitudes may make it harder to see it, as at points the church has treated the natural world as something to be used and subjugated rather than something to be valued and cared for. But God's intent in creation, as per Genesis, was to have humankind in the Garden of Eden caring for it. The echoes of divine intention are written on the hearts of people and into the very fabric of the world. With that being the case, it's only natural that spending time in uncorrupted parts of creation has a positive effect on people, because that's what they were made for. The sunshine that lifts your mood and helps you create vitamin D, the warmth of sand underfoot that can soothe aches and pains, the refreshing smell of the earth after rain, even the stinging nettles you may encounter in your garden are actually there for you. They are a nutritious vegetable when they're cooked. If you cook them, they can't sting you. And they make a good fibre for cordage and fabrics. But as well as these things that we feel as humans, sometimes we also see that creation around us remembers what the ideal world was supposed to be. One of the things I particularly enjoy about social media is the animal stories that come across it. I am an animal person, so I will happily look at any of those pictures and stories. So I like reading about the funny and cute things they do, and a lot of other people are animal people and like posting about the funny and cute things they do. And I also tend to like studies and finding out how they work in general. One of the specific things I enjoy that's come up is pet shaming posts on Facebook, which is people have their photo of their pets when they get into some of their weird behaviours or start causing problems. Some of them are just funny, like a cat with an obsession with a particular type of bread to steal as a toy. Some have a little, some are a little bit more than just weird though, and get into unexpected friendships and cooperation between species that don't normally get along, like a rabbit adopting and protecting abandoned puppies, or a dog adopting a lost baby squirrel. My favourite one of these pet shaming stories, which I've seen come up a few times, is about a dog in North America. The owner of the dog says something along the lines of, "My first son has an easy life with only one responsibility, to bark at things that come to their house at night and scare them off." They go on to say, "But it turns out his loyalty has a price, and one of the local bears has figured out that he can be bought." This is the third time this dog has been gifted deer bones in exchange for access to rubbish bins. The accompanying picture is a largish family dog happily laying down with an entire deer leg, looking very pleased with himself. Now, one of the key things here is that an average dog is no match for an average bear. There are a few specific breeds that are capable of taking on a bear successfully. I have actually seen them in a distance when I spent some time in Romania on an archaeological dig. In the distance is a very important phrase there, because those dogs are flock guardians and they will maul and kill anything other than their flock and their owner. So anything that approaches them is basically considered food. Now, I saw them from a bus travelling, so you don't get a great sense of scale there, but I'm aware the organisation that I was with has had at least one case of a student in one of the more remote areas ignoring advice about not approaching sheep and returning home with fewer limbs than he left with. And another case where one of the organisers actually had to kill a dog to save a student. We are not talking about that sort of dog. This is an average family dog that you would take to the park and play fetch with. So an average bear would quite happily eliminate this dog if it wanted something that the dog was in the way of. It would not be a problem for a bear to sort it out. But it didn't do that. Despite being an apex predator who could just go and get what it wanted, Somewhere along the way, this bear has observed that dogs like chewing on bones and has somehow reached the conclusion that possibly, if it gave the dog some old bones, the dog might be okay with it investigating the rubbish. It thought about the potential of this enough to pick up and carry deer bones to the property and try offering them. The bear saw that it had a harmonious option available and chose a path of peace, and chose it on multiple occasions. The dog's owner is obviously less keen on this arrangement than either the dog or the bear are, because people generally don't want large predators getting comfortable hanging out around their homes. But somewhere inside, both the dog and the bear have realised that the current natural order of things isn't necessarily the way it has to be, and that there are potential better options. Another thing I tend to watch and read when they come up is animal rescue stories. Sometimes this is the domestic animals that have been abused or abandoned and being given help to recover. Sometimes it's wild animals that are injured or trapped. When wild animals are in trouble, there are a couple of responses they have to rescuers. Sometimes they go for the fight response and put a lot of effort into trying to harm the large human that is touching it while it is trapped. Depending on the animals, rescuers may need protective gear or restraints to counter that. For some species, some rescuers may just accept getting hurt, like rabbits can do a surprising amount of damage, but people just accept it sometimes. Or sometimes they might go in knowing they have two chances to grab this animal and get it out of where it's stuck before it's too dangerous to handle. Sometimes animals go with the flight response and just try to get away as hard as they can. Sometimes they go with the freeze response, hoping not to be noticed, which doesn't usually work that well when people are specifically trying to handle you. But the other response that some animals have is that they seem to realise that the human is trying to help. Somewhere inside, they know that the real role of humans is to help and not to harm. A smaller subgroup of these animal rescues is cases where a creature's mate or offspring is stuck, and the free one goes and finds a human to lead to its trapped partner. This happens often enough that there's a meme that sometimes goes around saying, isn't it funny how some species' ultimate problem-solving move is to go, well, none of my other options worked, I guess I'll go and see if my local apex predator will fix it for no reason. Now, at one point I mentioned this to my mother, and she just said, well, of course they do. It's written on their hearts. Now, I'm going to put a disclaimer here and say that I haven't found a specific Bible verse supporting written on the hearts regarding animals, but there is that phrasing of the law being written on their hearts occurs a few times talking about non-Jewish people who do the right thing and follow God's law despite having never actually been given God's law directly. But there are sufficient references to creation shouting God's praise or groaning in its broken state that I feel it's a reasonable thing to affirm. Creation remembers what its goal was. In their worst circumstances, when everything has gone wrong and they have no other option, animals approach humans for help because deep inside they know that that's what we're supposed to do. While we have a broken world and most animals quite sensibly keep their distance from us because we are an apex predator and a threat to most species, the echoes of the way things were supposed to be are still there, even if we often don't live up to it. Once you start noticing these reflections of God's intent in creation, there are two basic ways that you can respond. On the one hand, you can focus on the negatives and let those ideal moments reinforce how the world is fallen and so far away from what it was supposed to be. You can be grieved about it. You can be angry about it. Sometimes parts of creation get angry about it. Crows and magpies not only remember human beings who wrong them, but they teach it to their friends and family. They teach multiple generations to hate that specific person who messed with them. Or the flip side of all of those wonderful stories of an animal who gets lost when a family moves and then travels across states to go and find them. There was one case of an abandoned dog who travelled 100 kilometres in order to bite the owner that abandoned it. That dog has some idea about the way things are supposed to be, and it had opinions to express about a certain human's failure to be a good steward. But anger can't drive you forever. It may give you a lot of energy in a short moment, and there is a right place for anger to motivate change. But if you keep fueling it and trying to run that way all the time, you will burn out. Anger is kind of like a dragster. Many years ago, I had a brother-not-quite-in-law who had a dragster which he and his father had built. At that point, it was the fastest car with its power system in the state. If you wanted something to do 0 to 100 quickly, it would absolutely achieve that. But that's all that it could do. You couldn't actually drive it to the track. You had to have another vehicle to transport it. He was invited to have it in a Christmas parade and had to explain that, like, as much as he'd like to, you simply can't do that with a dragster. And the reason you can't do that is because the engine generates so much heat as it's running and pumping that power through. If you do not have the airflow of travelling at high speeds for short periods of time, the engine will overheat and be destroyed. So those short bursts of high intensity stuff is the only thing the dragster can do. Proverbs 17:22 says that a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. The other way of responding to those moments of perfection that we see in an imperfect world is to let them spark joy and delight, to have them as a joyful reminder that in a fallen and imperfect world, creation still knows what it was made to be, and one day it will be restored to that. You can see them as encouragement that no matter how many things around you seem broken and less than ideal, there is always hope. There is always the potential to improve things. Joy is sustainable. It might not move you to make drastic changes as fast or dramatically as anger does, but it won't burn you out or consume you. If anger is like a dragster, then joy is like an average little hatchback. It's not going to be the fastest or the most dramatic. My current brother-in-law does actually race a hotted-up Barina, but why you race that I don't know, but he enjoys it. But it will go every day, whether it's short trips or drives across the state. That hotted-up Barina for rally driving is actually still suitable for an everyday car. Well, as suitable as Barinas ever were, but it will do every day, whether it's, short trips, drives across the state. Joy is not a short-term or situation-specific thing. It's something that can be there for you day to day, no matter what you're doing. So I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up, so we'll be leading in a song to finish. But look at the world around you and embrace the joy in the perfect moments in nature. When imperfections and cruelties make you angry, absolutely act to correct them. But don't dwell in an anger that will eat away at your soul. Pass through it briefly, but return to the joy and serenity that will nourish you. Recognise the echoes of the divine in the world around you and cherish them and make room for others to see them. Thank you.